Hi there, and this time I'm looking at the Jan Vermeer, the famous milkmaid. And we're going to talk about luminosity in this image, and we're also going to talk about how the colour composition supports the luminosity. I think this picture is probably, rightly so famous and so successful because of the rendering of natural light, which Vermeer was able to achieve. And it's the classic situation of the window light streaming in from the window across the wall, illuminating these objects on LHS and falling across the this kind of still life composition of the pouring of the milk and the bread. And I think we think that she's making some kind of bread, maybe a bread and butter pudding or something like that here. But of course, the crowning glory of the painting is the way he's rendered the light falling onto the figure of the milkmaid herself. And I think this is what makes the painting so powerful and so affecting. Just this treatment of natural light falling onto the woman's face and her garments. If we zoom in to the point where we can begin to look at Vermeer's brushwork and the techniques he's using, we can see quite clearly how he's, for example, on this, on her sort of headscarf, how he's applied white paint in these areas, like so, to create these very strong highlights. And obviously here as well. So, I mean, there's nothing terribly surprising about that, and obviously on her forehead here. What is rather interesting is when we look closely at the painting and we begin to notice these sort of spots and dabs of white or cream shades of white, which he's added in, and the way he's used his brushwork to create these highlights. When you look at it close up, it looks quite, in some ways, quite crude, but of course it's incredibly effective in the context of the whole image. We can see that he's used, a fairly sort of strong kind of impasto technique here on this this area of her collar. And if we come out and just move down, one of the things that I think is so interesting is the way we can see that he's employed what is really almost a sort of pointillist technique, where he's added these kind of dots and daubs of lighter coloured paint. For example, here, also very noticeable here. And these highlights that he's created around the edge of the pitcher from which she's pouring the milk. these are quite striking. And when we come down to look at the bread on the table in close-up, once again you'll be able to see the way he's made extensive use of this kind of pointillism, where he's just applied these dots and daubs of lighter coloured paint. Also here on the jug, he's created these kind of clusters of daubs of light. And these have all contributed to the highly luminous effect. Here on the edge of this is just the edge of the part of the sort of handle of this basket. And here he's applied these dots and daubs again to, and over here as well on this handle. He's used this technique quite heavily. If we look here on this this piece of blue fabric, which has just sort of casually been placed on the table, again we can see he's used these little dots to create these highlights, these little spots of light. I'm not sure whether this is this area. This represents a garment which she's taken off, because it matches this sort of skirt, sort of overskirt she's got on. Perhaps she was wearing this around her shoulders before she started work or something like that. Another area which I think is interesting is the arm here. If we zoom into the arm, we can see what, to my eyes anyway, appears to be a fairly crude series of brush gestures where he's added luminosity onto this upper area of her arm. And this, if you like, the sort of blending between this area and this highlighted area isn't actually terribly good to my eyes, but I think, you know, once again, in the context of the sort of overview of the image as a composition, and in terms of the way that the luminosity works overall, it is highly effective. If we just put a threshold layer on, this is quite interesting. Once again, threshold enables us to see this kind of luminosity map of the image. And I think if you look at this, you can fairly easily spot the fact that we've got, obviously the window is the light source. And then we can think perhaps of almost a sort of kind of triangular area where the luminosity is thrown across the subject and the surrounding environment and scene that she's involved in. We can see that the way that Vermeer has handled the gradation of luminosity between for example, this area of the wall, and as the light begins to spread across the wall, I think we will probably all agree this is absolutely masterful, the way he's done this. And we can see that he's added he's done some work in this area where he seems to have just, he's kind of scratched on some sort of white marks, which I think have helped this kind of gradation along. And there's these marks here, quite sort of random again, spotting highlights quite randomly applied there. I'm not entirely sure about them. But I suppose what I want you to, to focus on is if you just think in terms of the way the light moves from the window across the sort of shadowed area, and he's effectively created this marvelous gradient which gradually moves across the wall, and I think is extremely effective. Here also on this is kind of metallic basket or something here. He's added in some highlights to just cause this. This is just reflecting the light on this, what I think is a kind of metal object. So, I mean, overall, don't need me to tell you that this is a stunningly successful composition in terms of the way he's handled the luminosity and the way he's told his story about what she's doing, and the environment and the sort of whole atmosphere of it. If we think about the kind of things that we might do, actually, I've had a curve on there where I was just experimenting with the kind of thing we might do in Photoshop with our own images today. Would be to perhaps we might want to adjust luminosity on the face. Or we might want to, I'll just drop that back to how it was. But of course, it's incredibly important, I think, in this kind of image that we preserve. If we add luminosity, we've really got to preserve the balance between luminosity and shadow, which is what makes it affecting. Here, for example, I've just experimented with adding a filter, kind of DLC filter, which I would use extensively in a portrait image. And this gives us, the opportunity to do what Vermeer could not do, which is to just very easily affect the distribution of light. And here, as I toggle this off and on again, you can see that this has had the effect of kind of drawing the light in to this area, sort of sucking the light in to focus it on the subject more. But interesting to experiment with. I don't think that I don't think I'm going to be improving on Vermeer's work anytime soon. Another thing which I thought was rather interesting was I just popped the image into Adobe Color, and the analysis of the color in the image which came back, I've just created this kind of inset and popped it onto the painting, and I think you can see here how the colors from top to bottom work incredibly well to we're kind of creating this I suppose what we might think of as a kind of diagonal which is going from the most luminous area of the painting, which is really this top right corner, down across the subject, down across the sort of still life composition, and finishing off in what is the sort of really the darkest area of the image, which is this fabric of the tablecloth. And I think this this kind of color map from Adobe Color, as I say. This sort of shows us very clearly how Vermeer's use of color amplifies and supports the way he's dealt with the luminosity. As the luminosity moves down and reduces towards this corner, the color tones support that. So we begin with these very sort of light color tones, and we move down and we get the white of her head covering, we get the flesh tones, we get the highlight of the collar, we get this more sort of yellowish tones on the sort of bodice, and then we move into these sort of slightly darker greens, and then we encounter this sort of really rich, vibrant blue, which is quite dark, particularly down here. And then we have these elements in these sort of luminous elements in the what is really the kind of still life composition. And then we have these much darker areas down here. And as the luminosity diminishes, so the colours become darker and more intense. And I think that, for me, that is, I suppose, is part of the real genius of this colour composition which Vermeer has created. So that's it, really. Just inspecting, examining the Vermeer, thinking about the way he's used luminosity, thinking about some of the techniques he's used to get his effect, and looking at how he's used colour as well to create this truly extraordinary painting. And I suppose the reason I talk about this is that I think that as we're considering our own images and our photographs and considering our editing and retouch efforts, we can learn an enormous amount from studying this kind of thing, like a classic old master like Vermeer. If we particularly since we now have these very high-res photographs, so we can examine them at the sort of brushwork level. So there we are. I hope that's interesting for you, and look forward to talking to you soon.